Hey, welcome everybody to our July professional development workshop. I'm excited to have my remote work leader, join me today for this workshop. He'll be doing a good portion of the presentation, and I'll be helping him out and giving some information there. We'll do our introductions. So instead of introducing the speaker, we'll just kind of do our own introductions. I'll let Dom start, and then I'll share mine here in a second. So just a reminder as well, our next courses begin in August. So the registration deadline is August 2nd, and the courses will begin August 7th. So if you're interested in any of our courses, take a look at that. The leadership course will not be taught next month, but it will be in September. So Dom, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Trenton. I'm Dominic Bria. I'm the Associate Program Director of the Remote Online Initiative. You may have, if those of you who have attended our courses, you may have seen me lurking or taking part in some of the discussions. Where I'm coming from, I've helped numerous people prepare for interviews, spruce up their resumes, but also I want you to know that I've also been there plenty of times. So in the Great Recession, I got caught up into two different mass layoffs. And so I've been out there at the beginning of COVID. The organization I was with was depending on travel for everything, and so suddenly there was a travel ban on, and our goose was cooked. We were done. So I've been out there. I've done my share of interviewing and submitting resumes. I hold an MBA in marketing, and my doctoral degree is in industrial and organizational psychology. And so that's where I'm coming from. Trenton.
All right. So, and I'm Trenton Wilson, and I've been with this program for ever since we began in 2018. And my background is I started out my career as an accountant. I have an accounting degree from the University of Utah, and I worked in accounting for about 13 years. And now I have been in career development, career exploration, career counseling for the last 13 years as well. My experience came and my career change came when I left accounting during the Great Recession that Dom mentioned, and I became really good at finding jobs. I got jobs, and I'd work for a while, and they'd say, "Okay, now we can't afford you," so they'd let me go. And I had temp jobs and different things like that. So I became really good at interviewing. I became really good at job seeking. And so I kind of changed my career and started helping people find jobs. And that led to a job with the Department of Workforce Services here in Utah. I worked there for a few years, then ran my own business of career coaching and business coaching, which I think led to this job that I have with Utah State University right now. So I'm excited to be here, and excited to kind of help you guys improve your interviewing skills.
So think of the interview as different sections. So you've got the pre-interview section where you have to do all the prep work, and that's probably the most important part of the interview, I would say. Would you agree with that, Trenton?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Preparing, being ready. It's
right.
Critical.
So the things that you would want to do beforehand or study up on the organization that you're interviewing with, you'd want to practice interviewing for the job, come up with some questions that you can ask them about the job, and we'll talk more about these later. And so just going in, it's all about going in feeling prepared to represent yourself in the best light possible. And what the format of this professional development session is going to be, so we're actually going to go through some specific questions that you can think through. And part of the preparation process is looking up some questions. There is no shortage of interview questions that you can look up online. You can use YouTube, you can use Google's, they're all over social, and practice answering some of those questions. But the idea is to have a few different stories that you can tell. So as you go through the questions, and you'll hear what I'm talking about here, because we're going to have Trenton give an example of a bad answer to the question, and then he's going to give us an example, a good example of an example of a good answer to give for to a question. So we're just going to talk some of these and hopefully give you an idea of the kind of preparation that you can do beforehand to have a story ready that you can tell. Because a lot of people, myself included, when we interview people, we want to hear specific situations. The idea being, that your past behavior is probably a pretty good predictor of your future behavior. And so that's what that's all about. What am I missing here, Trenton?
So yeah, I think just, the middle part here on this slide, the first question during the interview, end of the interview, we're going to go into detail here. But just the post interview, make sure that, you're staying front of mind, mental real estate, don't let them forget about you. Send them a thank you note. Handwritten is awesome, and it's really, really personal, and it's still a really good idea. Sometimes it's not practical in today's instant world. And so sending an email thank you is almost just as good nowadays, just because it gets you that, you're thanking them right away. And then just follow up if you haven't heard back when they say they would. Those are really important parts of the interviews, that pre and post interview. That's where a lot of people win the job, if you know how to do those. But the middle part here is where we're focusing today, and I think you're going to get a lot of help in interviewing through those parts.
Yep, absolutely. So one thing I want to mention before we get deep into these questions, I recommend that you bring a small notebook and a pen to write with. And there's a couple of different reasons for this. One is sometimes you'll get asked multiple part questions. And if that's the case, it's a good idea to write down the different parts of the question, so you don't have to ask them midway through, what was the rest of that question? Another thing that I find useful is to write down the names of your interviewers, interviewer or interviewers. Very often there's more than one. So that way you're using their names, and it shows that you're on the ball. And I was even in an interview situation once where they had multiple interviewers and they had brought in multiple interviewees. And they said, one of the questions was, tell us what you would do in this situation. And they began to describe the situation. So I reached down into my bag and I grabbed my notebook and pen and took some notes. I was the only one who did that. I got that job. And so you just never know. It's just a matter of being prepared for whatever they throw at you in the interview. And with that, let's get into some of these questions. So here's the quintessential question, and this is really important, because this is the question that, tell me about yourself, and it can be asked in various ways, but this sets the tone. This sets your tone for the interview. And so Trenton's going to give us a bad example of that.
Mm-hmm.
So Trenton, tell me about yourself.
Well, I was born at the LDS hospital in Salt Lake City, and back in 1976, And I grew up, well, when I was 5 years old, we moved to Emery County to a small town called Elmo. And I loved Elmo. It was really cool. You know, I got to go out on the desert all the time, camping and fishing, and it was awesome. And I really got to like rocks a lot. And and I grew up there, and and then I went on an LDS mission when I was older, and then I went to school, got a degree, and it's just really fun. I live in Richfield now, and I still get to have a lot of fun, camping, and there's all sorts of cool stuff around here. So, but yeah, and I have 3 kids and a dog and 5, my kids have lots of cats. And so I've got 5 cats in my house. Unfortunately, I actually like cats, but that's a lot of cats. So anyway, that's a little about me.
Excellent. Thanks, Trenton. All right. Why is that a bad answer? You raise your hand or just speak up if you like. Turn off, unmute yourself.
It's not really relevant to the job at all.
Right. So all of the things that he talked about, none of it was talked about how his education and experience were leading up to this job, how it was all adding up to him being a really great choice for this position. What else?
He didn't sell himself at all about his abilities and how he would have been their right choice.
Yep.
And not highlighting any of his career accomplishments, that type of thing. He totally missed that, or they missed knowing him as a professional.
Excellent point. Eileen?
Sorry about that. Yeah, he didn't let him know what his work background was, his education, and how he ended up in that office. So yeah, it was just a combination of no.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Excellent. What was the pattern? Did you see a pattern in what he was saying?
It was all about what he likes to do after work, not what he's doing, what he will do with work.
Right. And did you feel like he was rambling a little, maybe?
Yeah, he was nervous. You could that's what it sounded like. He was nervous.
Trenton, I happen to know that Trenton is not at all nervous right now. He happens to be a pretty good actor.
No,
so.
I know, but that's what
I know. Yeah, exactly. Very good. All right, Trenton, let's hear a better example of an answer to, tell me about yourself, Trenton.
All right. Well, I am currently a career coach. I love helping people with their careers, helping them define what it is they want. My journey started as I went to Utah, to the University of Utah, and got an accounting degree. And I worked in accounting for 13 years, and I loved accounting, but there was a part of that just wasn't me. And I left a job with Marriott in 2008, 2009 during the Great Recession, came back home to Utah, and I had lots of opportunities to find jobs in a recession era, and I became really good at it. I like to refer to myself as a professional job seeker at that time, and I was really good at it. And so I started teaching people how to do it. I volunteered to teach at the Department of Workforce Services, the state employment agency. And so I started teaching classes there even before I was hired. And so eventually they hired me because they kept telling me, hey, there's a job available. That got me that job. At some point, I wanted to do something a little bit more. I wanted to help people start businesses and do other things. So I actually left the Department of Workforce Services as a career counselor and a business coach. And so I started doing that, which also led me to this job that I'm applying for today, this remote work certification program coordinator. And I'm just really excited about all the different things that I get to do to be able to help people find something they love to do.
Excellent. So now I should have mentioned up front, well, Trenton is pretending as though he's interviewing for the position that he holds right now. And so did you notice that everything that Trenton said was relevant to the position for which he was applying right now? I mean, all of the experience, all of the education that he mentioned led up to why he's qualified for this position. Other comments on that?
Melissa, did you have a comment or are you just clapping?
She's applauding you.
I actually was trying to raise my hand, but yay, good job. The one thing I noticed and I'd like to point out is that there was not one negative thing about any of your positions or your situations or anything. It was all positive. And I think sometimes people fall in that pit where they complain. And I think that's a very, it's a turnoff for a new employer.
Yes, very much so. Kara, did you have a comment?
So one thing that I have always kind of thought was that the tell me about yourself could be your 60-second elevator pitch, you know. It still kind of seemed a little bit long to me. Is there kind of a rule of thumb with how long you should make that answer?
Yeah, 30 to 60 seconds. I probably did go over a minute. And so, yeah, I'm not as practiced as you would be in an interview, but yes, that is great feedback. Even though, you know, the content was way better, I could have shortened that. So yes, absolutely. So yeah, so we're going to kind of review a little bit, and we probably hit a lot of these, the don'ts and the do's. We'll do the don'ts first because we did the bad example first, and then we did the do's. So we're going to be kind of, you know, kind of like Mater on cars. These are the to not do's. So I have a video clip that I wanted to share, but it was a little longer than we wanted to take up. So the to not do in tell me about yourself is don't talk about your personal life. Don't talk about protected information. Don't talk about political or religious affiliations or beliefs or hobbies. So hobbies, you know, rock hounding, rock collecting really has nothing to do with career coaching. I could probably make a spin for it and a sales pitch for it, but you know, you want to try to avoid the hobbies that don't have anything to do with your job. And then don't ramble on. So as we mentioned, try to keep it 30 to 60 seconds. The do's are tell about your accomplishments, qualifications, skills, experience, interest in the company, relevant hobbies. So if I have a hobby of, you know, helping people start businesses, that's not something that is necessarily part of my job description. But it is something that we help people with. We point people in the right direction for that, different things like that. And then make sure you prepare for the answer so you can say it naturally. One of my biggest pet peeves with this one though, is, hello, my name is Trenton Wilson, and I am an accountant and a process innovator. So practice it so it's natural, not so that it's memorized or scripted. That's an important aspect to do that. So
very good.
Back to Dom.
And so the reason that we don't talk about political ideology, we don't talk about religious beliefs, we don't talk about family. There are things that we do in order to not raise red flags, and there are things that we do to be sure to raise green flags. And so talking about those kinds of things could be a red flag in the mind of your interviewer. You just don't know. If you mention that you have little kids at home, that could be a big red flag to some interviewers. So don't talk about it. In every case, though, try to look for ways to make it a green flag. And I'm going to keep coming back to this as we go on. All right, let's move on to the next question here. And this is one that I haven't heard of an interviewer ask this in quite some time, but I know that it still happens. And the thing to be aware of is that this question, what is your greatest weakness, comes in various forms. There are other forms of this, and we'll talk some more about some of those forms as well. So let's hear Trenton's a bad example. Trenton, what is your greatest weakness?
Oh, I hate mornings. Mornings are terrible. It takes, I could sleep through the biggest World War disaster that, I don't know, it's just crazy. Every time I try to wake up early, it just seems like I keep hitting that snooze button way too many times. I feel like I've done okay, getting up when I need to, but man, it is a problem for me sometimes. And mornings are my greatest weakness. I just don't like them.
Excellent. All right. That's your greatest weakness. It was good to, but you can see how that would be a big red flag to some people. So don't give your interviewer that in this position. Instead, we want to turn this one, as with all the other questions, we want to find a way to turn it into a big green flag. So think about ways that, all right, what's a way that you can talk about a weakness that you have and make it a green flag? So there's a couple of guidelines to use here. One is give them something small and talk about how you overcome that now, how you've mastered that weakness. Don't talk about situations that costed the organization money. Don't talk about situations where you've lost your job over something. This is not a confessional. Give them what you need them to hear, and that's all. You don't need to give them anything beyond that. They don't need to hear all the things that you did wrong in past positions. They don't need to know any of that. Not their business. So Trenton's going to give you a good example of what to say on this. Trenton, what's your greatest weakness?
Well, so first of all, I'll tell you, I love Microsoft Excel. I do all sorts of things in Microsoft Excel as an accountant. I've done queries, I've done macros, I've done pivot tables. There's all sorts of things. There's so many cool tools in Microsoft Excel. The one thing that I would love to learn is Visual Basic. And Visual Basic is the back end of when you do a macro in Microsoft Excel. So if you record a macro, something that's a repetitive task that you do all the time in Microsoft Excel, the Visual Basic is the programming side of that. So you can actually go in and look at the programming, but I'd like to understand what I'm seeing when I go into that thing. And so understanding that, I think, would be an awesome thing. I'd love to take a Visual Basic class and learn how to program those macros without having to do the record macro piece.
Excellent. Notice how he kept that fairly brief. Let me give you another example. This is one that I've actually used. I love to be involved in the next thing that's coming around the corner. Some people might call me a squirrel chaser. So as you can imagine, the danger there is that I leave tasks. I could leave tasks undone. So I have to be very careful. So the way that I master that is I am a heavy user of Outlook, my Outlook calendar. And so whenever I put a task on my Outlook, I make sure that I also put in there a follow-up to it to remind myself, get back there and finish this job. And it never comes, the reminder never goes away. I never click to make the reminder go away until that task is complete. And so that's how, you see what I'm doing there? I'm giving a very small thing and I'm telling them how I mastered it. And that's just what Trenton did. So those are some important things to remember there. Trenton, you want to talk through these don'ts and do's?
Yes. So, and Dom talked a little bit about them to some degree. The don'ts, don't disqualify yourself. Again, if the job is a 8 to 5 job and you talk about your hatred of morning, you're probably not going to get the job, because 8 o'clock, even though for some people that's sleeping in, for a not morning person, that is really, really early. And so that's going to disqualify you. Don't talk about your character weaknesses. Don't talk about your inability. So Dom's example of squirrel chasing could have really gone off the rails, but he put it in a way that said, this could present a problem. I love the newest thing coming around, and I could be focused on a lot of that, but here's how I managed it. So it wasn't a focus on that character weakness. It was a focus on how he has managed that over time. And don't speak negatively about yourself. Don't speak negatively about somebody else. You know, you are there to talk positively about everything that you've done. And then don't highlight the major failures, things that got you fired, as Dom mentioned earlier, things that cost the company a lot of money or time or something like that. So the do's, there are 3 things that I always teach people, to ways to answer this question. The first thing is tell them something they already know. So when I was an accountant, towards the end of my accounting career during the recession, there were a lot of scandals out there. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, there was a whole bunch of different things that made it so companies didn't trust accountants. And so they started saying you have to have a master's degree or a CPA or something like that. And I didn't have either of those. So when I would go into interviews that were master's CPA preferred, that was my greatest weakness. I only have a bachelor's degree. However, I have worked for Marriott International. I've done accounting for a $50 million resort hotel. I've done this, and this, and this. So I would address that elephant in the room. This is, you know, you don't want to hire me because I don't have that master's degree or CPA, but this is why you should. The next is turn a weakness into a strength. And that's kind of what Dom shared the example of. And then a weakness within a strength. And that was my Excel example. Some of you may have been like, that went way over my head. I had no idea what you're talking about with all the Excel stuff. But in a job interview, you're taking something that I know really well, and I just demonstrated how well I knew Excel. And I just took a little piece of Excel that I wanted to learn more of. And then what have you learned and what do you do now? So those are all different things that you'd want to do. So we have a couple questions. So Stephen and then Fina.
Yeah, I got a couple on that one. When I was thinking I like to sleep in, I do. I like to sleep in from time to time, but however, that being said, I usually get up at 3 and 4 in the morning, so sleeping in is at 5. I still get to my 6 a.m. job with no problem whatsoever. Now, does that turn a weakness into a strength?
Well, I would say, you know, I wouldn't even bring that one up, because to me, that's a morning person.
Okay, well, I
Yeah,
also have one where I had a hard time connecting with people. I worked on it in my last job, and I connected with people so much that the people that were pretty much cussing and swearing at the beginning of the call were your best buddies by the middle of it, and you got them taken care of. Now, I want to improve on that, because you can never stop improving and getting better. I want to get to the point where you can get every single person that's mad at you happy. I haven't got there yet.
Yeah, that's a much better situation there. So Fina.
So it triggered a question I've had about going up for a position that is seeking, like he said, they wanted him to have a master's, but he only had a bachelor's. So my question is, for instance, in my case, I never even got my AA, but I took some college, right? But I also have like 15 years worth of managerial experience. So what is like the rule of thumb or your suggestions? Is that like, would that be kind of comparable to consider going for a job that requires a degree? Just go ahead and try, or is it like worth it?
Yeah, most of them. Oh, go ahead, Dom.
I was just going to make an observation, Fina. When you talked about your associate degree, you used a word a couple of times that kind of hurts you, and that word is only. You said only, and there is no reason to minimize that with the work you did on that associate
Okay.
degree. I would say, yeah, I have an associate degree and I have this experience. So you want to talk about how your combination, your unique combination of experience and education makes you an ideal candidate for that job. Go ahead.
But I don't have the associate degree. That's what I was saying.
Okay.
That's what
Yeah, I
I
would
said.
just-
I
I would
only
just
had
say-
some college, but not the degree. Like I didn't complete it.
I would just say, yeah, I've attended some college, took some great classes that helped me in my career. And I have 15 years of managerial experience. Focus on the experience, but not necessarily the lack of education. You can point it out and say, you know, I don't have the degree you've listed on the job description.
Uh,
However, this is how awesome I am because I have 15 years of experience with this company. These people think I'm awesome. This is the accomplishments I did. This is why I'm still the best candidate.
so that would be during interviews saying I get the interview. So my real base question is it worth going after, like, there's positions I've seen available that I think I could be a really good candidate for. I could do the job, but I
Mhm.
just don't have that degree that they want, but I
Yeah.
have other things instead. So should I, pursue things like that as well?
So let me ask you something, Fina. Let's say that you do. What's the absolute worst thing that will happen if
Say
you
no.
do? So I would say yes, absolutely. Default to
Okay.
going for it.
Well, and most job descriptions will say, you know, this degree preferred or a comparable professional experience. You know, they often will put that comparable experience or
Yeah,
a
I've seen
combination
some
of
of
both. And so if you know you can do the job, you sell yourself. You get out there, you send the best resume you possibly can, and you knock the interview out of the park and get that job.
Okay,
So yeah,
thanks.
yep.
All right, let's move on to the next question. And so the question is, describe a situation. It's not a question, but a lot of these are formed as statements. Describe a situation where you went above and beyond your job description for a customer. Trenton.
Well, you know, I am a people pleaser, you know, not in a bad sense, but I'm a people pleaser, and my managers love what I do. I am always out there to make sure that, you know, they look good, that I look good. Every job I've had, I go above and beyond. You know, I always bring great results. I always, you know, whenever there's a task that needs to be done, I'm the first one to volunteer to do it. I've come up with all sorts of really awesome new processes and procedures for companies, and I've just gone above and beyond all the time on all my jobs. And my managers, they'll give me rave reviews if you ask them, you know, what are some of these, you know, how I do in this particular job.
Excellent. What specific question, or excuse me, what specific situation did Trenton use in his answer? Anybody hear one?
No,
There wasn't one, was there? So that's, as an interviewer, that's one of my pet peeves, is when I ask for a specific situation and somebody gives me a very general answer. So that's why I say, before you go in, think about the stories, the experiences that you're going to tell about during the course of your interview. So let's try that again. Trenton, describe a situation where you went above and beyond your job description for a customer.
All right. So this wasn't necessarily, so my customers in this case is going to be the managers and the department heads in the hotel. When I got to my last hotel that I worked for with Marriott, it was a $50 million resort hotel, and it was a big hotel. And so every period end, we had about 4 or 5 days that we would review the financials every day. And as the assistant controller, I always had to print the financial reports and make sure they were sent out to all the managers in the hotel so they could review their financials and we could make any adjustments or post any of the expenses or anything that we needed to fix. And standing at the copy machine for 2 hours, making copies of the whole stack for the executive team, and then pulling out each department, making copies for those, it was a really big waste of time. I had learned a trick at another job where I could take a Crystal report and format it so that it fit perfectly in a Microsoft Word document. So every period end, each of those days that we had to go through that, I would go in and I would run that report. I would format it in a text format so that I could put it into a Microsoft Word document, and then I would save it on the network. That process probably took me 5 to 10 minutes to do. And I would send an email out to all the managers and say, the reports are ready. So you're welcome to go look at this. And so they would go pull their own reports, print their own reports. When I left Marriott, my boss had taken this process and he submitted it as a Marriott best practice. And he was awarded the Marriott Best Practice of the Year. So this became a Marriott-wide process that I had developed.
Excellent. So did you hear? So he used a specific situation there, and talked about how he went above and beyond to serve a customer. So that's a good example. Trent, you want to walk through these don'ts? Sorry, I hit that button a little bit early.
That's okay.
Didn't mean to rush you.
That's okay. All right. So first of all, don't speak in generalities. There may have been some people that heard my first answer and thought, oh, that was pretty good. He was talking about how awesome he was and that he goes above and beyond, but there was nothing specific. When they say describe a situation, they want a situation. So they want one specific thing that you have done for that particular thing. And so that kind of goes to the next bullet point, don't be vague. And then don't forget to highlight your role and the result. What did you do and what was the result? How do you think that answer would have been if I just said, I just automated this so that managers could get it every month? That cut off one of the most important results, that this became a Marriott-wide best practice. That's something that is definitely needs to be sold out there. So do use a specific situation, do show your action and on your part, and then share the result. Make sure you brag. There's a book out there called Brag, The Art of Tooting Your Own Horn Without Blowing It. It's an amazing book. If you've never read it, by I never can remember her name when I want to, but it's a great book. So Brag, The Art of Tooting Your Own Horn Without Blowing It. So take a look at that. Looks like there is a question or a comment in chat here. Let's see. So Ann, do you want to maybe share that thought or ask the question?
Well, my day job is a bit of a nightmare right now.
Uh-huh.
It has been for 2+ years ago. I had 3 people doing what I've been doing by myself for 2 years.
Mhm.
It has been 7 days a week, 12 to 14-hour days are not unusual. 20-hour days have happened. And basically, I'm sacrificing myself for the university.
Mhm.
Our grant numbers are up. We have set and broken records. I have an 100% on-time error-free record for submissions, which is pretty much, that's very impressive.
Yeah.
But that also dumps a whole new level of stress on, because the first one that blows that record is like, oh, damn. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah, and how do I explain what I've been doing without coming off like a crazy person or like I've sold my soul to the devil?
So I would say, so I would focus on your results. First of all, you talked about that you've set records for grants, that you've you've done a lot there. What I would say if you were in an interview is say, I currently have a job where I have done some amazing things, and you'll tell them about it later. And then just maybe briefly say, however, I'm 7 days a week. I'm, 10 to 12 hours a day, and I would like to find something that's a little more family friendly. And I really, really, like what I do, but there's so much that I'm doing. And so, and then go into the example of, so, and I would maybe not talk about that in this particular question, because the above and beyond is the grants that you've gotten. You could maybe say, my current employer actually requires a lot of me. I'm working 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day, which is above and beyond what is normally expected. But the results that I get are awesome. So for example, I got this grant that was this, and this, and this is how I got the grant. And so that's kind of, you are going above and beyond by working so much.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
But
would,
try
I
to
would
make it
not
sound
even,
positive.
yeah, I would go further, one step further than that, and just say, don't even mention the 10 and 12-hour days and 14-hour days, because it's negative. You want to stay away from all the negative stuff and focus on the positive stuff that you've been able to accomplish, because that needs to be the focus of the interview.
Mhm, for sure.
Steve,
Hey, can I ask a question real quick?
sure.
But isn't the answer to the specific answer to the above and beyond is that sometimes I put in 14-hour days, I put in 20-hour days, I work 7 days a week for my employer so that I can accomplish this, and this for them. So
You could. You could do that. I would advise against it though, because you don't want your new employer. I mean, that should not be the norm. It's fine to say you've got a project going on. I'm there for the duration. You talk about that, talk about completing the project and on time and those kinds of things. But you certainly don't want to raise the expectation that, yeah, you can go ahead and walk all over me. I'm that kind of employee.
Gotcha.
Don't do that. Yeah.
okay, I see.
Steve.
I'm not sure if I went above and beyond, but I was doing this one job writing technical reports for an engineering firm. When I get to a certain point, I'm doing several reports at the same time. I go out in the field and do the research there and then come back. And later I had to go away I was going to school at the time, so I went to college and I was replaced by a PhD. I think it was 2 bachelor's degree and a guy with a doctorate degree. And when I got back, the guy that was working with me said I did better than all those guys put together. So I don't know if that's going above and beyond, but I was a hard worker, kept going the whole time.
Good.
I think that's a good
Let's-
example.
Let's move on to this next question. Describe a situation where you had to be corrected by your supervisor. And this is, like I mentioned before, this is kind of a variation on what's your greatest weakness. It's one of the variations. So Trenton, go ahead and answer that question for us.
All right. One time we had an event that I was trying to do with this company where we had some employers coming in, and it was a great event for our community. And I just thought, our company had a lot of strict policies about talking to the media, about marketing without going through the marketing department. And so it was a pretty strict environment. And I was like, I don't want to go through that red tape. I just want to do my own thing. And so I reached out to the newspaper and I said, hey, we have this event. don't put, just mention it. And instead of just mentioning it, they quoted me in the newspaper. And so I got in trouble. And I like rules are kind of dumb sometimes. You have to reach out, you have to go through marketing, and you have to follow this process. I probably should have done that, but it was just a little thing. It was just trying to get them to mention us. That's all it was.
Okay, good. So you can see, can you see what are some things that were wrong with that answer?
He basically admitted that he doesn't listen to his supervisors and do what he's told.
He did. It was pretty long. It was kind of a longer answer than they probably wanted. Anything else? I mean, you can see
Negative.
red flags popping up all over the place there.
Pretty
Rules are
negative
dumb,
about some stuff.
Very good. All right, Trent, just let's try the good answer. Describe a situation where you had to be corrected by your supervisor.
Okay, so when I was working at this one place, we had this event that was coming up, and it was going to be very helpful for job seekers. We were going to have employers come. There's a lot of different things we were going to do. And I happened to know somebody at the newspaper. And so I reached out to them and said, hey, is there any way that you can just mention this event? Here's the website link that talks about the event. If you could just say, hey, DWS, well, I just said the company, but DWS is having this event. Would you share this out there? And so I was just hoping that they would just kind of make a general statement on something that they may have found on the internet. Well, instead of doing that, they quoted me, which was against policy. I was supposed to go through marketing, and I was supposed to, there's a process there. And it was a great learning experience for me. I realized that sometimes shortcuts are not worth it. Sometimes, even if you know somebody and you feel like you've got your bases covered, it was a big learning for me. Luckily, my manager was really nice. I wasn't even written up. It was just a conversation. Hey, make sure you use the marketing process. Make sure you use this process that's been outlined, because it's really important to make sure that the state of Utah is represented properly. And even though you didn't share anything that was bad about our department, we have to follow these processes. So it was a humbling experience for me to realize that shortcuts aren't the best way to go. And I've grown from that. I've learned from that. I appreciated the feedback from my supervisor. It was a good learning experience.
Okay, so Trenton used the same story, but what was the difference between the way he talked about it the first time and the way he talked about it the second time?
First time he admitted that he knew it was wrong, and this time it sounded more like it was a oopsie.
Yep.
And that's how it was a little more, it was more of an oopsie. I was like, okay, I hope I can, So yeah, it was a learning experience for sure. Any other thoughts? Didn't want to cut anybody else off, but. All right.
You also turned it into a positive and admitted that it was humbling, but you grew and you appreciated the experience, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
That didn't do any damage to your company, fortunately, but you learned from it.
Yeah.
The other thing that I noticed too is that he talked about his employer in a positive light. So it would have been easy to say, oh, they were throwing unnecessary rules at me, and it seemed it seemed unnecessary. So I went, so rather than talking about them negatively in that second example, he actually spoke about them positively. And that's always a good thing to do.
Mhm. Yep. So the to not do in this one is to don't speak negatively or blame. So it could have been easy for me to blame, or, I talked in my bad example about, the rules stink and they're bad, and, and they're just a pain. So, and don't use an example that ended badly. Like if you got fired, or if it cost the company money or something like that. Unless there's a real positive spin that you can put, or something that you learned or corrected or something like that, don't use your worst examples here. And then don't forget to express what you learned and how you would act differently. So the do's are: use a situation, action, and a result story. So always talk about a specific situation, action, and result. I did in both cases this time, but I wasn't very smart on the first one. Take responsibility, but be positive. So if there's something like this one, I took responsibility. I tried to cut corners, and I realized that you don't do that. It's not worth it sometimes. And then express what you learned.
Very good. All right, we're drawing down to the final stretch here. We can't hold a class on interviewing without talking about this question. This may be one of the most important questions that you'll answer during the course of the interview, and it requires the homework that we talked about early on. Again, there are myriad places you can go to search for good questions to ask an employer. For example, one might be a year in, what will this position have accomplished that for you, that you'll call them, you would say that's a successful employee. You want to know what a successful employee looks like, but there are other versions of that. So let's hear what Trenton's versions of this. Trenton, do you have any questions for us?
Nope. Or, yeah, what's the salary for this? And are there other benefits? I've got some time that I need to take off in the next month or two. Could I do that?
Is this,
So-
yeah, okay, excellent. Those are excellent examples of what not to do. All right, Trenton, let's hear the to do. What, do you have any questions for us?
I do, actually. I've written down a few. I'll just ask a couple. So first of all, what does the training process for this look like? I know it's a new program. It's just been rolled out and funded. How do you guys expect to train us on a program that's not been done? What are some of your processes there?
Okay, we have in place processes A, B, and C.
Awesome, great. How will you get the word out, since this is such a brand new program? What are some ideas that you have to get the word out for this program, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, those are good questions. Good. So one point I want to bring up here is, before I turn this over to Trenton, is before you close, what they're doing is giving you the floor. So before you give up the floor, there are a couple of things you want to remember to do. So ask the questions, have them written down. You can try to memorize them if you want to, but I advise against it. Write it down, bring them in and look at it. And if you're interviewing virtually, even better. But while you have the floor, use that time to give them a final pitch. Just say something like, I just want to one more time reiterate the combination that I'm bringing to this position. Or in whatever pitch, whatever marketing, whatever branding, self-branding that you want to do there, that's your time to do it. And then close with, what is the timeline for your hiring for this position? Because you want to know, when can I expect to hear from you on this? So close with that. So Trenton, what other points do we need to remember?
So, and you can, so the don't come without questions. If you don't have a question to ask, it shows you don't have a lot of interest. You haven't done research. You haven't dug into things, and don't fail to ask the questions. Don't ask about salary, benefits, personal or irrelevant. And then, make sure, actually, one thing I didn't put on here is make sure that you've done some research. If you ask the question, so what products or services do you sell? They're going to say, go to our website. That's going to be their answer. And they're going to say, this person paid no attention to what was going on. They've done no research. They don't care about our company. So ask questions that you can't just get off the website. So the do's are prepare 3 to 5 questions, ask 2 to 3, and then ask about the company job timelines and expectations. And like Don was saying, you've got a great opportunity to pitch yourself. You can ask a question that's a leading opportunity for you to do that pitch. What based on what you've seen so far, what are some of your concerns you have right now? That's a great question to ask, because they might say, well, we do have some people with the education that we're looking for in this position. So it gives you another chance to say, well, here's a couple other reasons why I am the best candidate for this position. So, you can lead the question into that final sales pitch that Dom's talking about. That's another question that you can ask is find something that leads into that opportunity to pitch yourself.
Very good. Here is a list of other questions that you ought to prepare for. That what do you know about this company and our culture? That they may ask you about that. How would you go about finding out about that?
Well, the bad answer to that is, well, I know you're hiring. Something like that.
Please don't say that.
Yeah, definitely do your research and tell them what you've learned. What you love about their culture. So,
and what was your greatest moment in college? When have you demonstrated your ability to solve a complex problem autonomously? And what tools and resources were your best help? How did you come up with? Again, this comes back to stories. Tell the stories of your past experiences. Why are you applying for this position? That's a really common.
And on question 3, bring the notebook, because that was a multiple question. And sometimes the questions are so long, you may want to put a note.
Yeah.
These are what I need to respond to,
Yeah.
So go ahead.
We're running over a little bit. If you need to jump off, feel free to. We are recording this, and so we'll send you the link to the recording if you can stick around, great. We're just going to wrap these up a little bit more, and then and like I said, we'll send out a link to the entire recording. Why are you applying for this position? I'll bet you can think of examples of what the way you shouldn't. I mean, why are you applying for this position? Well, because I want to make money. Or because, those are the obvious ones. It just casts you in a horrible light. Don't do it. What's a good answer for that one, Trenton?
Talk about how awesome their culture is. I've got friends that work here that love it. And I think, and just the way that you treat your employees, the way that you help them grow, the way that you help them, in their jobs, learning new skills, different things like that. You guys have a fantastic reputation, and it just sounds like a place that would support my goals and ambitions.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a good way to answer it. This next question, number 5, is this addresses the possibility that an interviewer may ask you a question that is inappropriate. So I don't recognize that accent. Where are you from? They may ask you other ones like, do you have any kids? Are you a member of the dominant religion around here? Or, there are all kinds. My standard answer to that question is, call them by name, Trenton. That is a conversation I would love to have with you after I'm hired. Okay, so in other words, I'm not gonna say, hey, you can't answer, because there we go with negativity. We don't want that. What we want to say is, I would love to have that conversation with you, but I think that's a conversation we should have after my hire, isn't it? And so, so you've just kind of nudged them in the proper direction there. Any other comments on that, Trenton? Am I missing something there?
No, I told Dom yesterday that I liked that approach, you know, because you could easily kind of throw them under the bus and say, you're not supposed to ask that question. And if you feel like you've decided based on your interview and the interactions you've had with them that maybe you don't want to work for this company, and you feel like they're asking that question because they are going to discriminate, and you feel, you know, whatever, I'd say it's probably okay to say, you know what, that's not a question you're supposed to ask me right now, because you don't want the job anyway, because if they're going to discriminate for those things, that's probably not a place you want to work. But if it's still a place you want to work, and maybe it's a small company and it's, you know, little Joe's coffee shack down the street, and they probably don't know all the HR rules and processes and procedures, I think Dom's approach is probably a really good one. Just to say, you know, I'd love to talk to you about that more once I'm hired. It's a good way to answer it.
Okay. And the final question we have listed here is, who was your worst boss and why? So think about what they're after here. This is a blatant example of them fishing for red flags. So how can you take this question and turn it into a big green flag?
So my approach is always, so when I get this question or something similar, I always talk about my boss at one of my hotels. When I first got to that hotel, the accounting was a nightmare. It was a mess. There was a lot of problems and stuff going on. Don't necessarily highlight that, but what I talk about is this particular boss throughout the hotel was kind of known as somebody who spouted his mouth off without a filter. You know, he often joked about political things. He joked about religious things. He joked about a lot of things. And so he had offended a lot of people. So he kind of didn't have a great filter. But in the interview process, I got to know him fairly well from there. You know, we actually went golfing when I went to interview. We got to become friends. So we went golfing a lot together. And I got to a point where I just understood that if he said something to me that could have been offensive, I just kind of let it roll off my back. There may have been a time or two that I might have said, no, that's not appropriate or something like that. But for the most part, I just knew that was his personality. You know, so I project the worst boss part onto how other people saw him and not my thing. He and I accomplished a lot together. And that's something that I would go into, is talking about how we accomplished a lot, you know, cleaned up the books. We had a lot of great successes and different things like that. But, you know, it was just, he just had a bad reputation in the hotel. So.
Bina, you have a question?
So this is probably a rare circumstance, but two of my longest jobs that I had, both were manager positions. One was for about 5 years and one was for about 15. Both of them I worked for family. One was for my in-laws and the other one was for my, at the time, boyfriend. Now, my question is, how is it perceived by prospective employers when you've worked for family and then have left the business?
Well, why would they know that you worked for family?
If it came up like something like this question, what was your worst boss? I would say one of those instances.
Yeah, so but they don't need, my point is, they don't need to know that you were working for family or for your former boyfriend. I would just talk about this in terms of the cost to the organization because of the way that they led it. So you know, if you might talk about, well, because of the way this person treated his employees, he had a team full of people that wanted to see him lose, or we didn't act cohesively. There was no cohesion in our group because of the way that he attacked us in staff meetings, for example, something like that. But talk about it not so much in as character flaws, but in the way, in terms of the way that it costed the organization.
Okay, so here's a related question. When they're gonna go and do, like, say, they check your references as far as employer, can we contact your employer? I'm kind of using the loophole that both of those businesses don't even exist anymore, honestly. But I mean, I could get them in touch with those people, but that's probably not the ideal reference.
Yeah, so I wouldn't use it.
Just say they're out of business.
Yeah,
Or just say yes. Let them find that out themselves.
Okay,
yeah, and references, so companies are actually not allowed to say anything bad or even good about you. They are actually only supposed to say, yes, they worked here from this
Oh.
time to this time, and yes or no, we would rehire them.
oh, okay.
Now,
Well, what
if
if
you
they said
give,
no? And they wouldn't
if
say
you
that.
give a non-HR person as a reference, or if you give, so you could give the boyfriend as a reference,
Mhm.
and because that business does not exist anymore, he probably could say something. But technically, as a business, you are not allowed to defame somebody. You're not allowed to say, oh, they were the worst employee I've had for years. They can't say that. All they can say is, no, we would not rehire them. That's the worst thing they can say about you
Okay.
legally.
I mean, I
So-
don't think anyone would even have anything to say about it. I know they wouldn't, but it's just a matter of also lying because they're bitter.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So
Ideally,
you just
you
want to
would,
find, you want to find the best references that you
yeah,
possibly can.
exactly.
And that's
ideally, you
the,
would, yeah, you would talk to them beforehand. You would talk to your reference beforehand and say, hey, can I use you as a reference? And if you need them to talk about a specific thing because of the job that you're applying for, then be open with them about that.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You bet. Are there, who has other questions that we can answer before we close today?
I do have a question.
Annette?
So, how do you portray your weaknesses? I don't know if that's the right way to ask it. So, you're applying for a job and they have several duties, and maybe let's say dealing with customers is one of your weaknesses, but you excel in everything else. How do you portray that and say, I'm not very experienced with it, and I am willing to learn on the job, and it's something that I can be better at, but I do not have any experience with it, or I don't do good with people, or I'm an introvert or stuff like that. How do you explain that?
Okay, so first of all, if they're asking about your greatest weakness, you may choose to talk about something else entirely. Don't talk about that one. That you don't have to. It doesn't. I don't know if that's your greatest weakness or not. Choose something that will help you cast yourself in the best light. So you talk about a small weakness and how you overcome it. Now, if they ask you specifically about this question about customer service, and you feel, oh, this is a weakness of mine.
Yeah.
You could talk about, that I'm a fast learner. I'm still learning the best ways to deal with customers, and both easy and difficult customers. But I'm a fast learner. You talk about it in those terms. But I wouldn't come out and say, yeah, I'm not very good at customer service. Talk about what you are good at.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yes, it does. I also have another question.
Sure.
I've seen most people talk about the questions that when you get asked, do you have any questions for us? And you say, do you, as the hiring team, have any hesitancies towards hiring me? Do you think that's an appropriate question, or do you think, what is your thoughts on that, and Trenton too, or anybody else?
I would flip it as a positive spin instead of saying, what don't you like about me? Just say, how, as you've looked at my resume and as you've seen in my interviewing here, is there any questions or concerns that you have? that I can help answer. You know, so try to not, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but try not to say, you know, what about
Hesitancy.
me you don't like,
Yeah.
you know. So
Another way you might word that, Annette, is to say, well, from where I'm sitting, I think that I fill every one of the needs that you've listed here. But do you agree? Where are the where are you a little bit concerned? Maybe you might word it that way. I don't, you know, that's but yeah, I mean, I think that the concept is a good one because it gives you a chance to address. So if they say, well, it looks to me like you don't quite have the right education or the right kind of experience, and then you can address it head on and talk about it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions?
I was gonna actually comment on Annette's first question of, you know, if you don't have the experience, you probably have something similar. So an example, today, my kid was actually probably just barely finished an interview with an interview today at a convenience store. I've never done retail sales or anything like that. And so, you know, in the question of, tell me about a time when you dealt with an angry customer, or what's your greatest weakness, telling them something they already know is, well, I've never worked retail. However, I can count cash in my head. I will rely on the machines because the machines are often more accurate. So I will learn to use the cashiers, but I can count money very well. And there's a lot of other things that we can address, you know. So you talk about your organization skills, you talk about your people skills, you talk about different things. So even if you haven't had that experience, take from the experience you do have. So
Good point.
Thank you.
All right, we've run 15 minutes over. It's probably time for us to wrap it up. Thanks so much for sticking with us, everyone. Like I said, we'll send out that link. And thank you for joining us.
yeah, thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you.